Hello guys, here we are back again with session 4 of our Prism tutorial. We have been a bit late though due to some reasons, and now we're back anyways, going back to the topic. So today we will see about circular paths, which are basically nothing but looping through, getting back to a previous stage in any process basis of some condition. So those are usually useful during a live project every time it is required. We will also see how to change runtime values for a particular data item, which are particularly useful in debugging mode. Let's say you are doing a loop for hundreds of items and you don't want to see all 100. You want to just see first, second and then the 99th and 100th item. So in that case we will see how do we change the runtime value of the counter parameter so that we can directly jump to 99th item. We'll see some debugging technique which are very useful. Prism gives you two options, set next stage and breakpoints, which are particularly useful while debugging. It is used almost everywhere. And we will also see how to use collections and loops. Okay, so let's get started. So let's create a new process and name it something like circular path test exercise. Okay, click on next, give some description, circular whatever, and do a finish. Now let me open this. Okay, so this is a blank process which has been created. Now we want to create a circular loop. So a circular loop is nothing, you want to do the sequence of steps for a particular number of times. So that is what we are going to mimic right now. So for that, as you might be aware, for any circular loop exercise you would require a counter. So I will create a data item and I will name it as counter. The data type would be number and the initial value will be 0. So it's like I equal to 0 in any programming language, right? And then we would also require the maximum number of times you want the logic to be run. So that will be our maximum loops. Let's name it maximum loops. So another data item named as maximum loops. The data type will be again number and initial value, let's put it 10. So now we are going to do something like a for loop wherein you write for I equal to 0, I less than 10, I plus plus. We will do something like that. Okay, so for that firstly we would require a calculation stage to increment the counter, right? So I will name it increment counter and the expression would be I plus plus. So it is basically counter plus 1 and it should be stored again in counter, correct? So and what else we will require? We will require a decision stage which would basically check if your counter value has reached the maximum loop value or not, something like I less than 10, correct? So let's do that, putting a decision is counter less than max loop. Okay, and we will check here if the counter value is less than maximum loops, right? So if that is the case, then what we want to do? If that is the case, we want to loop back, else we will stop the workflow. So let's do that. So for looping back I would require these anchors just to give a good visual representation. Anchors don't have any other work in any flow. So loop back, we will do something like this. If your counter value is less than maximum loops, then loop back to increment counter, right? This is the circular path which we created. Now let's connect it to start and end. Okay, so basically now our flow will, every time it is run, it will check, it will increment the counter and then check if the counter is less than the maximum number of loop value. If yes, it will loop back. If no, it will end. Okay, so we'll see those values here. The changing values of counter we can see here. Okay, let's run it. Refresh, no errors. Now when I run it, see the counter value has changed to 1. Now second time it is running, counter value has changed to 2 and so on. So it will go back. Right, now we are getting bored by looping through every time. So I can pause it. Okay, like I explained in the starting, let's say we don't want to see this particular loop being executed 10 times and we want to end it but successfully, not want to terminate it. Okay, so what we can do, we know for 4 times it has been successful, so I can open the counter data item and change the current value to 9. Okay, so now when it increments the counter will be 10. Next time when it checks this decision, counter is not less than 10, so it will exit. Right, so let's run it. You see the counter value got changed to 10 and it ended the loop. So this is how you can create a circular loop and you can change the runtime value of a particular data item. So these things only you can do during your debugging stage. You cannot do it in live production stage. Okay, so basically any logic written within these steps, these 2 stages, will be executed for a maximum of 10 times. Right, okay. So now let's see an exercise wherein we will create a collection and we will loop through it. So this is one way of looping through. The second way is, let me delete all those. Okay, so deleted. Right, let's see what's a collection is. Now data item can hold only one particular value of one particular type. Collection is nothing, it's just like a table in any database. It can hold multiple data types, multiple variables inside a single variable name. Okay, so that's a collection. So let's drag and drop this collection and open it. I will name it as, let's say, order table. Okay, so when you create a collection, you see there are 3 fields: field, initial values and current values. Current values will be by default not highlighted because those are the values which are generated during runtime. Okay, so let's add 3 fields. Okay, we will name it as, the first field will name it as order number, which will be of type, let's say, text. Description, you can give anything. If you don't wish, you don't give. Next column we would create as quantity, which will be of type number. Right, and the third column we will create, let's say, order date, of type date. Right, so now we have created a blank table with 3 columns in it: order number, quantity, order date, of type text, number and date respectively. Okay, so now let's give some initial values. So you come to initial values tab, you click on add row. So if you want to add 3 rows, you can add 3 rows. So for every row it will create a blank table for you. So you can give your values over here. Let me name it ABC123. Quantity is, let's say, 10, and order date, let me give it 3rd of May. Then let me put DEF456. Okay, quantity will be 20, and the order date, let me give it off something like April 2016. Now next one, XYZ something, then the value quantity, let's say 50, and the date, let me give it off February 2017. Okay, So now we have created a table with 3 initial rows in it. Correct. Now on the bottom side you can see there are some check boxes over here. Reset to initial value whenever this page runs. It is by default tick. That means whenever you refresh and run this particular process, your collection will be reset to this particular table, the initial table which you have created. If you check on hide from other pages in the process, the scope of this collection variable will basically be limited to the main page only. It will not be visible to any other page. We will come back to that later in our videos, wherein we will create different pages and we will see the hierarchy of pages in a process. Okay. The third option is single row. If you click on single row, then this table will always contain only one row. It will not contain more than one row. Okay, which is not required for us, so we are not doing anything. So click on OK. So this is a blank order table which has been created now, right? So let me make it bigger. Okay, so now let's say we want to loop through this table entirely. So there is one stage named as loop stage. When you drag and drop, you see here it by default comes with a loop start and loop end. So in the certification exam as well, you get a question, which are the stages which come with a supplementary stage with them. So one of them is loop stage, another one is wait stage. So anyways, you will come back, you will get to know those while you do the practice and when you go through the entire videos. Okay, so the beauty of this loop stage is whatever code you write in between these two stages, loop start and loop end, will be executed for every row of a collection. So basically loop stage works on collections only. It cannot work without collection. So when you double click on loop start, you see here this collection. So you have to specify a collection here. So let's put order table. Okay, click on OK. So now whatever logic we write in between these two stages will be executed for each row in this order table collection, right? So the logic will be basically executed 3 times since we have only 3 rows in the collection, right? So to see that, let me just try to print out the order name. Okay, so to printing out I will require a calculation stage. So I open it, I will name it as print order name, right? So the expression would be, now you see here the beauty. In collections you see order table. When you expand it, you see whatever is present there, right? Order date, order number, order quantity. So you can either drag drop directly the order number. So the notation is collection name dot column name. Okay, or else since we know this order number is of type text, if you expand this text section, you can drag and drop this order number from here as well. Okay, or else there is another way. You can directly write, if you remember the collection name and the table name properly, you can directly write the collection name dot order number. Okay, and let's say we want to store it in some variable, let's name it test, and I create it directly from here. Okay, this thing we have already discussed in our previous videos. You can refer back to them if required. Okay, so now clicking on OK. Now we will see what are the values printed in this test variable. So let's just connect those. I will require an end stage as well. So this is the end stage and I will connect it. Okay, so now when I refresh and run it, let's see what happens. Just pay attention to this portion. So for the first row the order name was ABC, second was DEF, third was XYZ875 and it ended. So basically for every row it has executed this particular stage which was in between loop start and loop end 3 times. For every row 1 time, so total 3 times. Okay, now let's do something meaningful. Let's try to add up the quantity and display the quantity. Okay, so to do that, what you would require, so let me remove this. Okay, so we are basically doing a summation, right? So as you might be aware, in any programming language, to do a summation of, let's say, two numbers, what do? You basically pick up the numbers a and b, you initialize sum as 0, and you keep adding individual numbers to that sum, right? That's the algorithm. So that is what we are going to do. We will initialize a variable named as sum type number to 0, and we will keep adding the quantity field in the order table to this sum. So addition, again we would require a calculation stage. Open the calculation stage. So let me name it as sum all quantity. Now what we are going to do here, we are basically going to add the quantity for every row to this sum, correct? So I will do sum plus order table dot quantity and store the result again in sum, correct? That is what we do in any programming language. So let's loop, let's connect it. So basically now what will happen, first time when this code is executed, so it will pick up the first row, it will come here, sum is 0, first row quantity is, let's say, 10, so sum will be stored as 10. Then it will go to loop end, again loop start, second row, sum is now 10 plus the current quantity is 20, so summation will become 30. Then loop end, then next loop start, sum is again some value, let's say 50, the quantity in the current row is 50, sum is already 30, so 50 plus 30 will be 80, and it will be stored in the sum 80. Okay, so let's visualize it and let's see it. Okay, let's run it. So just pay attention here. Sum is 10. For the second row it added the quantity, third row it added the quantity, and final sum we have got as 80. Okay, so this is one. Now next example, what we can do is we can directly see how do we calculate the earliest order date. You see here in the initial values tab, you have order date 3rd of May, 13th of April and 14th of February 2017. So we have to find out the earliest date in this order date column. So ideally we will need this as an answer, 13th of April 2016. It is the lowest, it is the earliest date, right? So to do that, what we will do, think of the logic and I will explain it. Okay, this is the logic which we are going to apply. We will loop through the collection for each row. If it is the first row, we will consider the date in this first row as the earliest date and move to next row, right? When the next row comes in, it is not the first row anymore, right? So we will check, we will already have a value in our earliest date field which we have created, the data item. So we will check if the current row date is less than the saved earliest date. If that is the case, then we will save the current row date as earliest date and move to next row. If that is not the case, we will simply move to next row. So we are going to build this, right? Okay, so to build this, I will remove all this again. So what we would require, since we are using we need to identify whether it is the first row or not, we will have to keep a counter to keep the row count. So for that I will create a data item which will check the name is row number, type number, counter is 0 initially, right? So now for each row we will increment the counter so that we keep the exact row number, right? So increment row number, and the expression would be this row number plus 1 and store it in same row number, right? So after incrementing the row number, we have to check whether it is the first row or not, right? So let's check it by decision stage. So if it is the first row, so we have to check if row number equals 1, right, and name it as first row. Correct. If it is the first row, then what should it do? It should basically put the value of this row's order date as the earliest date, right? So we need a variable to store the earliest date. So we can either directly create from here or we can create from calculation stage. Since we are going to use the calculation stage, I will use the calculation stage and name it set earliest date. And what we will do, the current row's order date, correct? So current row's order date should be stored in earliest date variable, and I will create it here. Okay, so I will link it. So till now this is our process. Increment the row number. If it is the first row, then set the current row's date as earliest date and end the loop. Correct. If not, let's say it is the second row, then what to do? Then we have to check whether the current row's or the second row's date is less than already saved earliest date. If that is the case, put the current row's date or the second row's date as earliest date and end loop. If not, end loop, right, as we discussed. So we can put here is current row date less than earliest date. Now the expression would be current row order date, right, is it less than already set earliest date. Okay, if that is the case, then put the current row's earliest date, current row order date as the earliest date and end loop, else simply end loop, right? This is what we saw in our presentation. So now let's go through the process which we created again. Okay, so it will start, it will increment the row number from 0 to 1, so it is the first row. Now it will check if auto row number equal to 1, yes, so it will pick up the first row's date and put it as the earliest date, right, and then end loop. Now the second row will come, so row number will become 2. This condition first row becomes false, and then it checks if this second row's date is less than already saved earliest date. If yes, it will take the current row's order date and put it at earliest date and end the loop. If not, it will simply end the loop and move for next row. Correct. So let's see, let's run it. So let me just rearrange so that we are able to visualize what is happening. Okay, so let's run it. So just pay attention here. First row, it sets the current row date as earliest date, that is 3rd of May. Second row came in. This condition becomes false. Checks if it is less than earliest date, yes, so it puts in second row's date in the earliest date. For the third row, it checked again, which did not match the criteria, so it ended, right? So we got our earliest date as 13 April 2016, which is the case. Correct. So now you know how to use collections, how to use loop stages, how to create a circular path, and how to change runtime data. Correct. Now there are two important methods which are used during your debugging. One is set next stage and one is breakpoints. So let's say we want to break this particular process for manual intervention, so at this particular stage, right? So we can right click and click on breakpoint. Okay, and let's run it. So what will happen basically when we run it, the process will start, then it will come to the next stage. Whenever it encounters that breakpoint, a pop-up will come up saying that breakpoint has reached. Okay, remember this is only useful in debugging. even if you have a breakpoint or multiple breakpoints within a process and it is run from the control room, it will have no effect at all. The process will run as if there are no breakpoints present. This is one question for your certification exam if you are planning to do so. Okay, let's run it. So when you run it, a pop-up comes up, breakpoint was reached. Okay, so to proceed further, you can either close this and run it, okay, or else next time when it comes up, you can simply run it. You have to double click and it will go. Okay, now let's say we have already got the earliest date, and for some reason I don't want to execute this particular things, this two stages I don't want to execute, and I am already in the mid of execution of this process, and I don't want to run this. I want to run directly from here, right? So what I can do, I can right click and click on set next stage. When I do that, my cursor comes to set earliest date stage. So now the process will execute from here only. Okay, so these all will be ignored. Let's try it. You see, it executed from there directly, right? Now where is it useful? It is particularly useful when you have a lengthy process created, and let's say this is a process and this portion is common and you are debugging some issues. So you run till this portion, right, by a breakpoint, run till this position, and after that, without refreshing, if you do any changes within this code in this portion, without refreshing, just click on set next stage and run it. Okay, so since the collection has no current row, it is giving this error because we already finished our loop execution, right? So hope you get that, why to use set next stage. It is particularly useful in debugging only and to test your code. Okay, so that's it for today's training, guys. If you have any questions, please put in the in the comment box, and please feel free to post your questions, and do like and subscribe to our video. Thank you guys, I will be waiting for your comments, and see you soon. Bye bye.